All right, good afternoon, everybody. As we're here for the 31st episode now of Pick a Pop. This is Peter Marzano, and going to take a look at what went on yesterday in the NBA with two playoff games, both of which were very close and exciting, which, at least in the Western Conference, is kind of a change of pace from what we saw in the first two games of those two series, respectively. But last night, the Cavaliers and the Raptors had their first game. And it certainly lived up to expectations. This is anticipated to be one of the more exciting series of the postseason. It's the third year in a row that these two teams are meeting up. My initial prediction was that the Raptors would take this in six, and it was really a back and forth game throughout. But furthermore, looking at what transpired late in the game, I missed the first half of the game, was able to watch the second half in overtime. And Cleveland was really blown out of the water in the first quarter. They were outscored 33-19, got back in the game by outscoring Toronto by 11 in the second. And then it was back and forth for most of the second half. But in the second half and overtime, I think this was really a case of maybe that psychological, kind of deficit that Toronto's at after losing in the playoffs the last 2 years to LeBron James and the Cavaliers. I feel like maybe that's part of where it started to take over. Now, granted, the Cavaliers got a lot of contributions from pieces that really hadn't been there for much of this postseason before, because it wasn't a stellar game by LeBron, who shot 12 of 30 from the field and 1 of 8 from downtown and 1 of 6 from the free throw line. So in a lot of those aspects, one of his worst games, despite recording the triple-double at 26, 11, and 13. So you got all of that from LeBron, who played 47 minutes. But the real contributions that made the difference for Cleveland in this game came from the 19 points from Kyle Korver, the 20 points from J.R. Smith, both of whom hit 5 threes, the 16 points from Jeff Green off the bench, who was perfect from the field, and 7 of 8 at the line. That's somebody that they really missed in that Indiana series as far as production goes. And that's kind of been the issue with him his whole career, has been consistency. And especially in the postseason, we just hadn't seen it yet. But he had a great game when they needed it the most last night in Toronto. And then Tristan Thompson, 14 and 12 for him off the bench. And it's the second game in a row to where he's played a drastic impact on allowing Cleveland to win the game, coming up with some huge rebounds. Tristan Thompson had 9 offensive rebounds last night. So that was a huge part of what allowed Cleveland to kind of get the edge late in the game. Now, granted, Toronto missed 16 of its final 19 shots total. They missed their last 12 in regulation. They had some point-blank chances right under the hoop as time was winding down, and a couple wide open looks as well to take the lead, and they just weren't able to capitalize. There were a lot of missed shots, and that kind of showed itself with them shooting 9 of 28 from three-point range, and overall just 39 of 91 from the field. There wasn't an incredible performance from DeRozan and Lowry, mostly because they weren't going to play the ball dominant style play that we've seen them play in the playoffs in the past. DeRozan only took 20 shots, but he was 0 for 4 from 3, had 22, 7, and 5 with 3 blocks. And Kyle Lowry had 18 points and 10 assists to go with 3 rebounds and a steal, and he was 6 of 12 from the field and 3 of 6 from 3. So neither of them had bad games. The MVP of the game for Toronto was Jonas Valanciunas, who was finally getting that playing time in the fourth quarter. He had 21 and 21 to go, 2 assists and a block, and he came up with a lot of the big buckets down the stretch for Toronto, but they didn't really get the bench production that has kind of led to their success the whole year. Pascal Siakam gave him 11 points, but a big difficulty that they kind of faced was Fred VanVleet was cold in the 15 minutes that he was on the floor, and he is, of course, dealing with that shoulder injury. It appeared he re-aggravated it at some point and then came back in the game after being on the bench for around 15 minutes and wasn't able to hit some pretty high leverage shots. He was 1 of 5 from 3 in all, so he certainly faced those problems in yesterday's game. And, you don't know if that's going to be something that improves in the rest of the series, if his shoulder is, going to help his way to get better here, because Toronto needs him. He is the biggest piece on that bench. He's been the most consistent force all year, especially late in games. Last night, that became apparent that his consistency is something that they rely on and that they need in order to make their way through. So certainly really interesting to see how that game transpired late last night. But Toronto just could not buy a bucket late in the game. And part of that, makes you think that maybe there is a little bit of a mental edge that Cleveland has on them, that they weren't able to hit some pretty wide open shots late in the fourth quarter. So that's something that you don't anticipate would happen again in this series. But at the same time, Kevin Love was still 3 of 13 from the field, and LeBron, who was still clearly very tired from Game 7 and did not have a good shooting game despite having the triple-double, you can expect him to hit more shots in future games. So I think this series is really going to be very competitive, and Cleveland already took home court back. Not that I think that really matters in this postseason, especially because Toronto, like I said, is still the better team. They still have the edge in this series, I think, but this is a huge win for the Cavaliers, and I think it shows that this matchup is not over. It's not as clear-cut as a lot of people thought, including myself. I mean, I was really impressed with what I saw from Cleveland last night, but it's just going to kind of have to be a mix from those other contributors outside of LeBron that make it happen offensively in order for them to have a chance in these games. And like last night, they got that from Tristan Thompson, Jeff Green, Kyle Korver, and J.R. Smith. But that's 4 guys. Granted, if you could get Rodney Hood or Jordan Clarkson going in one of these games, that could really be a difference maker. But there needs to be some level of consistency from this team outside of LeBron James offensively in order for the Cavaliers to have a chance. So for that reason, I think Toronto's still going to win the series, because I don't think that they're going to get that level of contribution from 4 other guys each night. But I do think it's possible, especially if Kevin Love just gets into rhythm. He's somebody that does have that consistency. So if he's able to get going and develop a rhythm for the rest of the series, then it becomes a lot more plausible that Cleveland can hang around. But really, he's the X factor. And Kevin Love, who did have 13 rebounds, a lot of them huge last night, he needs to be hitting shots in order for the Cavaliers to really have a chance in the series, because you can't count on Jeff Green to play the type of game that he did last night again. And that J.R. Smith, while he can bring that multiple times in a series for sure, you can't really count on him to be bringing that. Now, on the other hand, Tristan Thompson looks like he's getting into a rhythm and can really disrupt things for the Toronto Raptors, especially looking at their big men. He's somebody that matches up very well with Serge Ibaka. And when he was on the floor last night, Serge Ibaka wasn't able to do much, and he was 0 for 3 from 3, just at 9 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and was neutralized defensively as well, as he didn't have any block shots. So I really like that matchup, and I do think that Tristan Thompson is somebody that you can reasonably expect to actually put up 14 and 12 or similar numbers, even if it's just a 10 and 10, if he's getting the adequate playing time. And Kyle Korver is one of the most consistent 3-point shooters ever, if not the most. So it's not out of line to think that he can get into rhythm for a series. So when you really break it down, Cleveland can make it happen, but it's going to take a lot of defensive effort, and it's going to take containing DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry from scoring any more than basically what they did last night, 22 and 18 points respectively. If you could hold DeMar DeRozan in between 20 and 25 points, then the Cavaliers have a pretty good chance. But if he's able to take over a game and score 30, 35 points, then I don't really think there's any way that the Cavaliers can really match up with that. So I still like the Raptors in the series, but it can be a very tantalizing series by the end. And I certainly don't rule out it going 7 games. The Pelicans and the Warriors were the second of the 2 games yesterday. To be honest, I did go to sleep for the fourth quarter of that, but it was certainly a lot more exciting than Game 1. Game 1 had a very close first half, and then Golden State just completely pulled away in the second half and ended up winning it by 22. And then with this game getting Stephen Curry back, who was coming off of the bench, things were just looking really good for Golden State, but New Orleans certainly showed up and got contributions across the board from pretty much everybody that played. They played a great game and stayed in it for the entirety of the game and only lost by 5 at 121-116, showing that offensively they can really hang in there with just about anybody, which was really kind of the concern a little bit with Portland, and they swept the floor over there. So looking at what they were able to do in this game, this was one of those instances that Rajon Rondo has shown in his career before where he can really take control offensively. He had 22.7 rebounds, 12 assists, and 5 steals, an outstanding vintage playoff Rondo game. Anthony Davis, 25 and 15 to go with 5 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks. And Jrue Holiday had 24, 8, and 8 as well. So you pretty much get big contributions from all your main guys. Nikola Mirotic had 18 points and 9 rebounds as well. E'Twaun Moore with 14, yet still they lose. And looking at what Golden State was bringing to the table in this game, getting 29 from Kevin Durant, 28 from Curry off the bench, 29 and 12 from Draymond Green, and only 10 points from Klay Thompson, who had an awful performance, 4 of 20 from the field, 2 for 11 from 3. He was very well defended by Jrue Holiday the entire night. But the thing is that now with Stephen Curry back, there's just so much more to worry about. And he was 5 of 10 from 3, had 28.7 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 steals. And last night was kind of one of those games where New Orleans really brought everything they had to the table. Granted, you can maybe expect a few more points out of Anthony Davis, but that would kind of be at the expense of Rajon Rondo dropping 22. So this was kind of New Orleans bringing you everything they got. And they still weren't able to pull off the win. So New Orleans is certainly hoping that something can change as they're going back home. But this is just one of those situations, especially with Stephen Curry back on the floor, to where as long as he stays healthy, this is something that's going to be very difficult for New Orleans to be able to overcome. I do still think that maybe they can win a game in this series, but I just don't anticipate it really being that close. I think it's very plausible that Golden State sweeps the Pelicans because I think everywhere you turn, they're just outmatched, especially with Stephen Curry back. I mean, Rajon Rondo certainly has an advantage in some aspects over him, but Stephen Curry is miles away the better player. Of course, obviously, with what he brings, just adding the greatest shooter of all time to a team that already has 2 other of the greatest shooters of all time in Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson. So, I mean, looking at just how all of them match up, whether it's Nikola Mirotic matching up with Kevin Durant or Anthony Davis matching up with Kevin Durant or Draymond Green, and Jrue Holiday matching up, with Klay Thompson, which defensively really showed to pay dividends last night, but that's something to where, Klay Thompson will probably get going. And on the other end, Klay Thompson locked down Jrue Holiday from deep, limiting him to 2 of 9 from 3. So I think everywhere you turn, this is just really difficult for the Pelicans to overcome. And I think the same kind of applies for Utah and Houston. The talent differential is just too big. It'll be interesting to see if Utah can hang in there a bit more tonight. They are the only game going on tonight. So that'll be interesting to see how Utah is able to perform in that game. But other than that, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with reactions from tonight's Jazz Rockets game.